News, views, voices of the global Indian community. India abroad.
I think we will start the session soon, so please grab your seats quickly. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our US-India Clean Energy Partnership event. My name is Shashwat. I'm a fellow at CSIS India Chair. CSIS, as many of you know, is a global think tank with more than 30 geographical and topical programs. CSIS Chair in US-India Policy Study leads center's work on India with the goal of unlocking full potential of US-India partnership. Much like the US, Indian states have autonomy in setting policies on a number of issues that affects the life of their citizens. States' action determine whether and how the policies that are framed by the central government will be implemented. Indian states are where the action is, and it's not unusual for many programs and policies made by states which are later adopted by the center. CSIS India Chair is one of the leading authorities on US-India subnational political and economic issues. And as a part of our focus, we lead a lot of projects where we build this relationship. A couple of notable examples that we have done in the past are partnership between the state of Gujarat and Colorado, the state of Rajasthan and Utah, NASIO and areas, and hopefully soon to be it will be with California and the state of Gujarat and Maharashtra. Starting with the State Department grant in 2016, our team began a series of dialogues with Indian states to identify one of their pressing issues. Our theory of change is very simple. We ask states what it is that they need and how we can help. The biggest ask from states have been capacity building, which enables them to choose the right set of policies and technologies which can be implemented for their achievement of 2030 goals. We have been fortunate to find many partners on this endeavor of supporting Indian states. We have partnered with US state governments and other entities such as NASIO, universities, and national labs. We are proud of our role in bringing this diverse set of stakeholders together. The results have been so successful that at the end of 2019 grant from State Department, we have been funded by many philanthropies and foundation consortiums, namely SED Fund, Rockefeller Foundation, Climate Works Foundation, MacArthur Foundation, and Hewlett Foundation to carry forward this work. Now, to set the context, in 2016, when Prime Minister Modi visited the United States, he announced 175 gigawatts of renewable target for the country. This target was broken down, and each state was given a smaller subset to achieve. A variety of technical, economic, political, and regulatory challenges meant the target was missed at the end of 2022. But last year, India overtook Japan to become the third largest solar power generator in the world. Last week at the G7 summit in Italy, Prime Minister reiterated his goal of advancing clean energy solutions and outlined 4 principles for India's approach to clean energy: availability, accessibility, affordability, and acceptability. The success of India's transition is crucial, not only for its domestic economy, but also for the global climate goals. In 2023, India's power demand increased by 5.4%, which is twice as fast as the global demand, which was at 2.2%. Achieving 2030 targets would require that from now for the next 7 years, India achieve 27% of growth rate for solar and 16% for wind. And this was achieved last year. And what is needed is this momentum which needs to be carried forward from now until 2030. India just elected a new government for next 5 years, and its policies and programs will decide how the country moves towards from now till 2030. This morning, we are hosting this event to discuss ways in which the United States can be a partner of choice for India to meet its 2030 target. Last year's joint statement mentions catalyzing clean energy transition as an important pillar of this bilateral relationship. And both countries outlined a shared vision of rapidly deploying clean energy, but at scale, build economic prosperity, and help achieve climate goals. Now, to kick off today's proceedings, we have 2 keynote speakers. And they have graciously agreed to stay back for 10 minutes after their remarks for the audience Q&A. Thereafter, we have 2 panel discussions. I would like to thank, first of all, the CSIS India Chair for helping me to put this event together. Our program director, Rick Rosso, who has been the architect of US-India subnational partnership at CSIS, and rest of my team members and colleagues. Before I invite Charge of the Affairs Ambassador Ranganathan, a quick introduction about herself. Ambassador ma'am has been a career diplomat in Indian Foreign Service since 1994. Prior to her arrival in Washington, she served for 4 years as India's ambassador to Republic of Korea. In earlier overseas assignments, she served in Myanmar, Turkey, and Hong Kong. And India, she has served in various capacities in Ministry of External Affairs, as well as in Ministry of Commerce and Industry. Ma'am, I would like to invite you to the podium to give your keynote remarks.
Thank you so much. Deputy Special Envoy for Climate Change, Rick Duke, friends from the State Department, from the Department of Energy. I see so many people from think tanks and from industry over here. Very good morning to all of you. Really happy to be here today to discuss clean energy, which ranks very, very high on the agenda of the Indian government. My good friend Rick has really put together some amazing people in this room today to discuss this issue, and my hope is that we will be able to seed some fresh ideas which will allow us to take the next step at the G2G level so that we are able to take advantage of this special moment in the India-US relationship. Just to set the context, I would say that the clean energy agenda is a major element of India's developmental strategy. The ambitious goals that we have set for ourselves have been set with the knowledge that we are projected to witness the largest increase in energy demand of any country around the world over the next 20 years. As a rapidly developing nation, as the world's most populous country, and as a democracy which is answerable to its people, our energy policies must form part of our developmental agenda. Our clean energy goals have therefore been set against a backdrop of balance between energy security, access to energy, market stability, and affordability. Just a few facts which I'd like to share with you. We in India have 17% of the world's population, but less than 4% of our share in global carbon emissions. We have increased our installed renewable energy capacity by about 128%, and our solar capacity by 30 times since 2014. Today's India's total non-fossil fuel-based installed energy capacity stands at just less than 200 gigawatts, which is about 45% of our overall installed electric capacity. Additionally, a total of 214 gigawatt of renewable energy capacity is either installed or in advanced stages of implementation. We are bidding out about 50 gigawatt of renewable energy capacity per annum until 2027-28. And we are very confident that we will achieve our goal of 500 gigawatt of renewable energy by 2030. In addition to such renewable energy deployment, we are focusing on innovative energy efficiency mechanisms. And to this end, initiatives such as the Perform, Achieve and Trade, Star labeling for energy efficient appliances, and Ujala for households have resulted in reducing our energy consumption by about 3.5% and our carbon dioxide emissions by more than 306 million tons every year. Consequently, we achieved our NDC target of reducing carbon emissions intensity of GDP by 33 to 35% compared to 2005 levels, 11 years ahead of our target year. Another meaningful impact and initiative was the Ujwala scheme, under which millions of households were helped to transition from wood-fired stoves to cleaner LPG stoves, and this was really a big step forward to reducing emissions across the country. In India, we really grasped the reality that energy transition and environment protection requires both individual and collective action. In this context, we have undertaken measures to encourage the adoption of Mission Life by every Indian household. In recent years, India has embarked on a transformative journey towards embracing renewable energy as a cornerstone of our developmental agenda. We recognize that recognizing that energy transition requires both individual and collective action, We have also launched initiatives like the Suryodaya scheme, through which we expect to create 30 gigawatt of rooftop solar capacity across 10 million households. And yet we also appreciate that the needle will really move only when big industry leans into this pressing need. And we are therefore focusing on developing battery energy storage, use of green hydrogen in high energy intensive industries like steel, shipping and fertilizers. Indian refineries, which are largely PSUs, have been given an ambitious target of greening their operations. And this is a big commitment given that India has the world's 4th largest refining capacity. International cooperation is crucial for our success, and India has been driving the global agenda towards energy transition. Initiatives like the International Solar Alliance, the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, One World, One Sun, One Grid, and the Global Biofuels Alliance are all examples of the efforts we have made to build collaborative action across countries, across continents. To my mind, one of the big achievements of the Indian G20 presidency was the extent to which we were able to get countries to come together to deliberate on the issue and to craft outcomes, including an agreement to pursue the goal of tripling renewable energy capacity globally, adoption of hydrogen principles to build a sustainable and equitable global hydrogen ecosystem, launch of the Global Biofuels Alliance. At this point, I'd like to focus on what we have been able to do in partnership with the US, and to that, I must give a lot of credit to Rick over here for his leadership in this area. Under the SCEP and the Climate and Clean Energy Agenda of 2030, we have been collaborating on power and energy efficiency, renewable energy, responsible oil and gas, emerging fuels, and sustainable growth. We have been engaging with industry through dedicated task forces. During Prime Minister Modi's landmark visit last year, we announced the India-US Renewable Energy Technology Action Platform, or RETAP, which will advance new and emerging technologies, such as green hydrogen, wind energy, and long-duration energy storage. Just 2 examples of recent ongoing cooperation with the US. One was a small initiative, which was the deployment of e-buses across the country, but I think it was very practical and very tangible. And the second was far more ambitious. That was the launch of the US-India Green Transition Fund. It's a $1 billion fund at the moment, but we expect that this will grow with the infusion of more money which is drawn from the market, so that we are able to facilitate more meaningful action with companies to drive our agenda. This really speaks to the 2 big needs of the hour, that is funds and technology. We have to find ways of making innovation possible, bringing that innovation to market, and giving companies the financial support that they need to adopt these technologies. In this context, I would say that the size and scale of the Indian economy is a huge advantage. We have seen time and again that when emerging technology gets deployed in India at scale, it becomes more viable, not just for India, but for the world. Solar energy is a great example of that. When we started deploying solar energy on a big way from 2009, since then the cost of solar has dropped by about 80%. And this has been made possible by the size of the Indian market and the commitment of the government of India that this was a technology that we wanted to embrace. Similarly, when we look at CNG, it is hard to believe today, but as recently as 1998, our national capital had mandated that all public and for-hire motor vehicles would be powered by CNG. We today have the biggest, in Delhi, we have the biggest public vehicle fleet operating on this fuel, and this has set an example for how CNG can be deployed at scale across the world. Some opportunities coming up, we see that with the passage of the IRA in the US, there has been a great deal of interest in green hydrogen. In India too, we have taken robust steps through the creation of the National Green Hydrogen Mission. Solar power as an input for green hydrogen constitutes about 70% of the cost at the moment. And given that we are able to produce solar power very cheaply in India, we have the potential by working together to be at the leadership end of hydrogen economy around the world. Carbon capture and storage is another available immediately available opportunity. IIT Bombay has been working to develop cost-effective carbon capture and conversion solutions, and some of our public sector companies such as SAIL and OIL are also working in this area. Given the extent to which this is being prioritized for innovation in the US, some sort of arrangement that we are able to reach between India and the US for information sharing, for technology development, and for investment would be of benefit to both of us. A third area of interest is battery storage. With India's cell manufacturing capacity under our production-linked incentive scheme and other investments, we expect to see very robust production in India within the next few years. We can position ourselves as a strong manufacturing base for lithium-ion batteries, and we would also hope to be positioned as a key supplier of critical minerals which are crucial for the entire supply chains in this space. Energy and climate change are intrinsically linked not only to our developmental needs, but also to our national security and geopolitical stability. And what we are seeking to do between India and the US through the framework of our critical minerals partnership, through the mineral security partnership, are all aspects of that would really be crucial for our overall cooperation agenda in the coming months. I think I have tried to touch on a few areas of what India and the US are trying to do in this space and all that we hope to do in the clean energy platform in the coming years. This partnership is consequential, and we believe very strongly that by working together, we will be able to provide the solutions to the challenges that we face and that the world faces. By working together on joint innovation, market development, and financing models, we will succeed, and we will enable the world to succeed as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Now for our next keynote speaker, Deputy Special Envoy for Climate, Richard Duke. He has been focusing on encouraging major economies to define and implement ambitious emissions reduction target under the Paris Agreement. He also works through other forums and initiatives to accelerate global progress towards carbon-free energy and reducing methane emissions. He has previously served as a special assistant to President Obama, helping to craft and implement the Climate Action Plan, including defining 2025 emission target for Paris Agreement, spearheading an interagency push for Kigali Amendment on HFCs to the Montreal Protocol, and authoring the US mid-century strategy for deep decarbonization. Deputy Special Envoy, I ask you to give your remarks.
Thank you, Shashwat, and thank you, Rick Rosso and CSIS for organizing this important event. And really thank you, Ambassador Ranganathan, for the partnership over the last year and more. We are very excited about the potential for the themes that you just covered, in particular for two countries that share so many interests and challenges and opportunities in the clean energy transition in our respective economies and globally to work together ever more closely on shared objectives and economic and climate opportunities. U.S. government continues to prioritize work with government of India on many important initiatives, including climate. And as the Indian government enters its next term after the recent elections, we look forward to intensifying this. We're going to be meeting with the new ministry leaders to discuss additional climate and clean energy priorities that we can take forward together with impending travel. And just stepping back, and as I'm sure you all are aware, India is the third largest source of emissions growth and the third largest emitter. Of course, it's important to put in context what's happening. So China is nearly 30% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And just last week, in a report from Asia Society with partners, there's positive indications that should China continue with its current pace of renewables deployment, it may have peaked its emissions last year and now can begin the journey on a straight line to net zero 2060, its objective. That's important in terms of keeping a safer climate future within reach. The United States, of course, is the second largest emitter with just over 10% of global emissions. And we're on a track that is consistent with 2050 net zero in the United States and 50% reductions by 2030. So lots of progress, lots of economic opportunity, lots of export opportunity in the clean energy transition and the overall climate transition. India, of course, can be a key player in delivering those solutions, everything from transformers to batteries to the IT that's needed to pull all of this together. And so we are very excited to intensify our work with India as it manages towards clean growth in its economy. On behalf of the SPEC Office, the Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, and Senior Advisor to President Biden, John Podesta, for the United States, we are focusing our collaboration on large-scale emission reductions, diversification of clean energy supply chains, and development in India as a manufacturing hub for these critical solutions. And we're in particular focused on how we support India in becoming a clean energy manufacturing hub for the whole Indo-Pacific region. Last year, as Ambassador Ranganathan noted, during high-level engagements, such as Prime Minister Modi's visit to the United States in June of 2023, and President Biden's visit to India in September for the G20, we worked on all of this together at a leader level. And this included the electric mobility partnership that has been such a positive sign of the potential for work across our governments and with our industry. It includes this clean energy investment fund that we are very committed to develop into a true multi-billion-dollar scale source of investment capital for renewables and storage in India at this crucial point of the energy transition in India. And it includes longstanding partnerships like the India-US Renewable Energy Technology Action Platform that the ambassador, or RETAP, that the ambassador also referenced, which involves lab-to-lab collaboration between the two countries to advance renewable energy and emerging technologies led by our Department of Energy. So we are excited about these efforts and how we can capitalize on this momentum to speed the energy transition and reduce emissions more quickly. And of course, that has all manner of benefits, including for public health, as we succeed in those endeavors. On renewable energy specifically, which I know is the focus of today's conversations, this goal from Prime Minister Modi of a target of 500 gigawatts installed by 2030 is truly ambitious. To meet this target, India needs to develop over 40 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity annually. And of course, it needs to double its transmission capacity by 2032 to fit all of that onto the grid in an integrated way. And that will need to quadruple in terms of transmission by 2040. The load growth in India is extraordinary in a rapidly expanding economy. That is what happens. And part of what we do hope to do, though, is find ways to creatively encourage energy efficiency as part of the energy transition, and I'll talk about that in a moment, in order to manage that growth and power it most efficiently. The US government and India are working together on renewable energy partnerships and on transmission and on this whole range of innovation and policy and manufacturing, spanning everything from advanced conductors for transmission to broader equipment. And of course, we're committed to deployment cooperation as well as manufacturing cooperation. And we look forward to discussions with the Ministry of Power leadership on these topics and the broader government of India. I'll leave the renewable energy specific topics for my colleagues from US government to touch on throughout the day, including the Strategic Clean Energy Partnership that the ambassador mentioned and which was launched in 2018, and more details on this multi-billion-dollar investment fund with the Development Finance Corporation. Building on some nice successes that we've already seen, Development Finance Corporation has already invested $500 million in India in a first solar manufacturing facility, and we are working on minerals security related to the critical minerals challenges and opportunities as well. So we're spanning the whole range of what is needed together and really just need to pick up the pace yet further. I want to touch on a few other areas where we are seeking to work together and to perhaps initiate some work. We are focused on how we align clean energy ambition and our bilateral climate initiatives with India's priorities on jobs and economic prosperity. And it's critically important that we tie these clean energy transition efforts to economic opportunity in a country that's at the stage of economic development that India is in, the most populous country in the world and a rapidly growing economy necessarily. And this underpins all of our work with India. It's also something which we look at domestically. If you look at the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States, we are focused, of course, on investing for the energy transition, the jobs and growth and manufacturing that comes with that. And India is an incredible strategic partner for doing that together more cost effectively, playing to our respective strengths and comparative advantages. One area that I wanted to touch on in a little more depth is cooling. Anyone who's been in India in recent months knows that it is experiencing right now a really catastrophic heat wave with a couple of weeks now, or more than a couple of weeks, of temperatures over 110 degrees Fahrenheit consistently. And this isn't just in India, it's across the whole Indo-Pacific region. We, of course, are about to see a major sustained heat dome in the United States as well. And this is a big issue for public health, has implications for, of course, load growth, energy demand, but it's really both a climate mitigation and adaptation opportunity at once. With a growing middle class and rising temperatures, electricity use from air conditioners in India is projected to rise dramatically. And frankly, it needs to in order to deal with this warming trend and the development benefits that air conditioning brings, the public health and comfort benefits that it brings, productivity benefits. But this translates into an 8x increase in the demand for cooling in the next 2 decades in India. So just a massive, massive driver of demand growth for electricity. And so in order to really manage the denominator on total electricity use as India seeks to clean up the numerator through renewables deployment, we want to work with Government of India on related opportunities, including for manufacturing. When you have a set of inefficient air conditioners flooding into the market in India, that makes things worse. And so we're seeing strained energy grids, increased emissions, and with that also pollution that comes from the existing power grid. So high efficiency cooling is one of the critical areas that we need to work on together, including in the Indo-Pacific region, to meet the doubling of energy efficiency goal for the region that is already out as a goal. And I'll note that we saw countries across the Indo-Pacific region and globally agree at COP28 last December in Dubai to the, of course, the Global Renewables and Energy Efficiency Pledge, to triple renewables and double efficiency, but also we saw 70 countries come together on a global cooling pledge. So the world is paying attention, and solving this challenge is really important and needs to be done together bilaterally where we can. This requires high efficiency performance standards. It requires efforts to prevent dumping of inefficient products into the market in India. And it requires a demand signal to the private sector to increase manufacturing of high efficiency cooling products. It's an economic opportunity for India to become a manufacturing hub for high efficiency cooling in the region. And CO2 abatement and energy cost savings are really extraordinary from this kind of work. Over the next decade, these efforts could yield net consumer savings of up to $25 billion in India, reduce national peak demand by some 50 gigawatts, and enhance profitability of distribution utilities and accelerate grid integration of renewables. So there's work to be done on revising standards, improving labeling programs, and providing industry with long-term signals as well as intermediate milestones to develop these products and indeed to export them. And India, of course, has created its own cooling action plan to address these challenges and opportunities, and we are very committed to deepening our discussions with relevant ministries about all of this. One other effort I want to touch upon is building on the work of India on electric mobility, which Ambassador Ranganathan noted. And just to note that in addition to sedans, there's major opportunities for two-wheelers and three-wheelers to be electrified, and of course, the electric buses that have been the focus of our partnership in the first instance. We also even look at things in the electric freight category as opportunities in India, with significant possibilities, given that 70% of goods are transported by road in India, and road freight vehicles are about a third of India's emissions. So declines in battery costs are, of course, allowing for lots of progress on heavy-duty vehicles that are electrified. And with the right scale, this can lead to major reductions in oil imports, savings for businesses, and lots of pollution reduction, both public health and climate pollution reductions. So this is another area where we see strong manufacturing opportunity in India, given that there is a lot of progress on electric mobility for buses. We'd like to expand that into broader heavy-duty vehicles where possible, including with investment where we can identify opportunities for our Development Finance Corporation or American firms to partner with Indian firms. And just to note that Niti Aayog is undergoing efforts on an e-freight initiative alongside something called the Electric Freight Accelerator for Sustainable Transport in India, which is the country's first platform to facilitate collaboration between government and private sector on freight electrification at scale. And we're encouraged to see these efforts to electrify the entire transportation system and look forward to broader conversations, including on supply chains for these vehicles, charging infrastructure for these vehicles, and of course, the ongoing effort to decarbonize the grid in India so that the power that these vehicles are using, whether it's buses or heavy-duty vehicles more broadly, is as clean as possible over time. So just to conclude, India and the United States share an extraordinary suite of opportunities across the whole energy transition in each country and in cooperation with one another for manufacturing for the world's benefit. And so we're eager to build on what has been a really fantastic year plus together and to find ways to accelerate this across the board. So thanks so much for the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you, Deputy Special Envoy. Now, before I open the floor for question and answers, please, while you're asking the question, state your name and affiliation. And there are my colleagues with mics, so we have one question there.
Hi there, my name's Jackson. I'm an undergraduate student at Bard College, and I'm very curious, considering India's growing interest in integrating itself into global tech supply chains regarding sustainability, how do the IRA and American efforts to sort of create homegrown equivalents of these industries affect that? And moreover, are there natural areas for competition in the green transition as well as cooperation between the United States and India? Thank you.
Do you want to take a bunch of questions, or you want to just do each one?
If we have more questions, we can take a couple more so that this.
Hi, thanks. Sarang Shidore, Quincy Institute, Director of the Global South Program. Question on the $1 billion fund that is, I think, very welcome for this sort of work. But my question really was about how much of that would be allocated to adaptation, given the fact that we have seen adaptation lag mitigation for quite some time in the global sense, and that there's a goal of 50% adaptation finance of the total that's not yet met globally. So any sense of what priority that would have in this fund and how that would be achieved? Thanks.
Okay, we'll take a couple more. And please stand up and introduce yourself because there are live audience as well. And ma'am, I think we can answer 3-4 questions together. There's one hand. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Claire Healy with E3G. I have a question about the grid. And could you give us an update on how countries are cooperating and collaborating in terms of grid modernization? I know this is something that India tried to spearhead before. An update would be appreciated. Thank you.
Hello,
Can you please stand up and introduce yourself?
hello, it's Azime, George Mason University. I wonder the geopolitics dimensions about how the geopolitics crisis affect the partnerships of US and India, and especially I wonder what is the best challenge related to this issue, dimension of geopolitics. Thank you.
And would you like to take it first?
On the aspect of how India hopes to be able to build its own capacity and its own supply chains, even at this moment when the US is doing the same through mechanisms through policies like the IRA. I would say that there is space for both of us in this to contribute in this area, and even if the objectives of both countries are fully, realized, and we are able to see a strong manufacturing capacity being built in India, strong capacity being built in the US, I think we will find that we will not be individually making each and every element that goes into the entire range of power generation, distribution, and consumption. And we will need to be able to develop those trusted partnerships which will allow both of us to succeed. It's still a little early for us to fully grasp what will be the larger or long-term market implications of the IRA. I think that is really something which our companies are looking at and trying to see how they can also take advantage of some of the openings that have been created. And I would say that the extent to which Indian companies have also now started creating their own facilities in the US, that speaks to that capacity as well. And I would be very surprised if over the next 3 to 5 years, we do not have more arrangements that are reached between India and the US that will enable companies on both sides to be able to make the most of these facilities and incentives that are being created. I mean, the PLI scheme in India is still fairly new. But I would say that companies are quite excited about the capacity that this creates. Insofar as I think the question was about what are we doing on upgradation and modernization of our grid. Was that the question? This is really a continuum rather than a very sharp change. Where we have come over the past 10 to 15 years is remarkable in itself. We're constantly upgrading and constantly trying to make this more efficient, make it more expansive. The network has really grown in India. We had a goal about 5 years ago of bringing our electricity network to each and every village. We achieved that. The next goal was to bring electricity to each and every household. I think that is where we are at this moment, to really expand and make it a facility that is available to each and every citizen and each and every facility in the country. In this context, also how we can expand our network across the region, because we have been very focused on making the advantages of the Indian growth story also available to all the countries in the region. So there is a lot that we are doing with some of the countries in our neighborhood, Nepal and Bhutan, to generate more, to bring that all into a larger grid, and then make it available to the power deficit countries in the neighborhood. So these are all, I would say, policies and initiatives that are at a fairly advanced stage. We also have the element of grid security, and I would say in that context, what we are trying to do is to make sure that the hard infrastructure, we make sure that the suppliers are trusted, the vendors are trusted, and we are able to work with partners with whom we do not have any conflict in our geopolitical calculations. And I think that speaks to the point that you had raised, that is the entire geopolitical environment in which we are working today. And I would say India and the US have a lot of shared perspectives on this. How do we make sure that our national security priorities are kept in mind while we are building this infrastructure, which is absolutely people-centric and people-oriented? But I would, with that, pass on to Rick.
Thank you, Ambassador. And let me just step back and say, when you look at the energy transition globally, it is an unprecedented wave of capital investment in order to substitute away from reliance on ongoing costs for unabated fossil fuels. And in that context, there's an extraordinary opportunity in both markets, in India especially, with the rapid growth and scale of India's economy, but also in the United States and globally. There is much market opportunity. So there is no doubt that there will be competition across the private sector in our respective dynamic economies, and that's both welcome and helpful. And above all, though, there is opportunity for partnership in deploying faster in the US and in India, and then exporting, in some cases together, playing to respective strengths. So we see extraordinary opportunities here for investment and partnership, and indeed we're seeing some of that start to emerge with Indian companies investing in the United States, responding to the Inflation Reduction Act incentives in key elements like solar, and the United States investing in India as well. So we want to encourage all of that. We see more growth potential for both economies and both private sectors. And we see, just as the ambassador indicated, there inevitably has to be some playing to respective strengths, some comparative advantage defined in this clean energy transition. Neither country can manufacture everything in the most efficient way. We'll be stronger together, and in a context where, in addition to the extraordinary wave of trillions in investment for the energy transition broadly, you also have an extraordinary opportunity to diversify away from a condition where currently, in so many sectors, 90% of what's manufactured is coming from one country. And US and India share an interest in diversifying global supply chains for clean energy manufacturing and deployment. So much to do there. I think on the question of the multi-billion-dollar investment fund and adaptation, I would just say the focus for that particular investment fund is on renewables and renewables plus storage. In the first instance, in the scheme of things, even a perhaps $2 billion fund ultimately is not huge and can't do everything, but it will make a contribution. And we will look for many other tools and opportunities, including things that will more directly help with adaptation in India. So for example, the potential to work together on cooling is really both a mitigation and an adaptation opportunity at once. And we think that there's a tremendous benefit to both countries and India specifically in that work together. Thanks.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Deputy Special Envoy. And before I close the session, just wanted to make one point regarding the link between the unified payment interface that we have in India and the potential it has to link with cooling technologies. It will not only ensure that there is enough energy efficiency measures, but India also manages to shave off certain peak demand, which is going to skyrocket because, with increasing cooling demand, which is going to come in near future. With this, I would like to close this session because we have next panel where we'll have Mr. Jeff Pyatt and Dr. Andrew Light to talk more about US-India federal cooperation. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Rick, for your time.
Thank you.
Now we'll shortly start the next session, which is the first panel of the day. We have Assistant Secretary, Bureau of Energy Resources, Jeff Pyatt, and Dr. Andrew Light, who is the Assistant Secretary, DOE. Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Where do you want us?
You in the center? Okay. Unfortunately, Ms. Anjali Kaur couldn't join us today because she's in India with the National Security Advisor, and they had a meeting with the Government of India yesterday. Just a quick introduction about our two speakers. It's not that they need, but just a couple of lines for them. Ambassador Pyatt served as U.S. Ambassador to Greece from 2016 to 22, and U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine from 2013 to 16. Ambassador Pyatt has also served as Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in Bureau of South and Central Asian Affairs, and he has engaged with India in 3 avatars, starting with 1992. Assistant Secretary Dr. Andrew Light has been leading the initiating and expanding several bilateral energy dialogues with various countries with a focus on clean energy and energy security across renewables, nuclear, and hydrogen. He is also Vice Chair of the Governing Board of International Energy Agency, and Dr. Light has also served as Senior Advisor and India Counselor to U.S. Special Envoy of Climate Change in the U.S. Department of State, as well as Staff Climate Advisor in Secretary of State John Kerry's Office of Planning. Welcome to both of you. Ambassador Pyatt and Dr. Light, we'll directly get into the Q&A session. So what we'll do is over the next 45 minutes, I have a couple of questions for both of you, and then I would like the audience here to ask questions, and after 15 minutes, we'll open the Q&A for the audience here. First question to you, Ambassador Pyatt. You have had a long engagement with India starting 1992. You have seen how India has evolved since the liberalization. You have seen different type of government formations which have happened in past 3 decades. Now a new government is in place with a dominant party at the core, but also 2 regional parties who have an influence. How do you see this in a way shaping US-India bilateral track?
Yeah, thanks, Ashwat. Thanks to CSIS for hosting this. Great to see so many friends in the audience, and obviously a hugely important time to be having this conversation. Andrew and I have not coordinated at all. We've both been on the road recently, so I'm looking forward also to hearing his perspective and just the really high priority that both of our agencies have placed on the energy and climate partnership with India, which I think is really globally unique in terms of the importance of how we work together and the consequences that India's choices about its future energy pathway are going to have on our climate objectives, on our energy security objectives, and on our energy transition imperatives. So from that perspective, you make me feel very old when you characterize this. I would flag a couple of insights from my side. Of course, this is not the first time we've seen an NDA coalition, and we all understand that coalition politics in India looks different from single-party government. I will say I'm particularly interested to see Chandrababu Naidu coming back into the picture, and Ambassador Ranganathan in the front. She remembers how enthusiastic I was when I came back from my visit to Hyderabad this spring, and to see how much is happening in that state in terms of both the importance of the innovation that's happening, companies like Greenco that I wasn't paying much attention to before, but are now moving aggressively both in India on issues, for instance, around clean hydrogen, but also looking at very large investments on storage here in the United States. The role that is played in Hyderabad, in Telangana, by anchor American technology companies, all of whom have very strong corporate commitments to clean power sourcing, and then the innovation that's happening on the supply chain side. I think back on past government coalitions that have, in which Chandrababu Naidu has been a player. He has always been a force for ambition and driving forward the strategic relationship between India and the United States. So I think that's an interesting and favorable aspect. The other point that I would make, recognizing that there's a political calendar in India, but there's also a political calendar in the United States. And I vividly remember, because I was political counselor in Delhi when the Congress government came to power in the summer of, 2004, right before the US election. We got a huge amount done in the US-India relationship in that period between June of 2004 and the election, with the Bush administration and especially Secretary Rice and others really driving forward a lot of the things that laid the foundation for where we are today. The NSSP, for those who remember it, a lot of the work around the nuclear deal. And so I'm very excited about the opportunities that we have to really hit the accelerator over the next couple of months before the US election. In this regard, it's enormously important that Jake Sullivan and one of my bosses, Kurt Campbell, are in India right now for the ISET meetings. And a particular source of pride for me in ENR is the fact that after my visit to Delhi a year and a half ago, and I started to agitate that we needed to be working more systematically on the issues around clean tech supply chains and energy transition, that we have added to the ISET agenda a formal pillar around these issues, and that was part of the discussions in Delhi. I haven't seen any readouts on that. Others may be tracking the press. I heard from Suman Berry this morning, and Suman said that it was in the press, some readouts, and that things had gone quite well. And then finally, just to note, and really glad to see Mr. Sinha from Tata Power here. I think as we look to the next couple of years of the US-India energy and climate relationship, the issues around supply chains and supply chain diversification are going to be critically important. India is one of the few countries in the world that offers a credible alternative to China, as we need to both scale up supply chains for solar, for battery, for critical minerals, for wind turbines, but do so in a way that doesn't get us deeper in the hole in terms of China's oversupply, monopoly position, and demonstrated willingness to manipulate those supply chains. So, for instance, been watching carefully the potential for India and been working with the Indian embassy here in Washington on the issues around graphite and some of the FEOC decisions that have been made in this regard. And I think I am very encouraged by the discussions that I have had with Secretary Kanta Rao, the Secretary of Mines, and the leading role that India has been playing in the Mineral Security Partnership and with working with Tata Chemicals on another side of the Tata Empire. I think this is going to be hugely important as we look to the future because of India's potential to be a global center for minerals processing, but also de-risking of our dependence on China. So there's a ton to do. As I said, I'm sure I'm forgetting 20 things, but I know Andrew will cover them quite well. So there's a lot for us to talk about and look forward to the conversation this morning.
Dr. Light, you lead the Strategic Clean Energy Partnership, and within that, specifically the pillar on power and efficiency. So under that engagement, how do you see the current composition affecting the bilateral track between US and India?
Thanks for the question. And just before I start, it's great to see so many friends in the audience. But also, it's been a great pleasure and an honor to serve with Jeff in these sort of parallel roles that we have at the Department of State and the Department of Energy, particularly because of our, I think, we're pretty far up there in terms of people involved in energy who have had a substantial relationship with India over the years, over decades. So this has never been a conversation that's been difficult for us. We both have been all in, our teams have been all in, they've worked extremely well together to try to advance the many different pillars of cooperation. And neither of us has to convince the other one that India is if not one of, could be the most important relationship we have bilaterally on energy issues. And it continues to be so, and it continues to get more and more interesting, complicated in some ways, but always incredibly fruitful and never at a lack of importance. And so this has just been a great partner on that. So I want to just say that I'm always pleased to be on a panel to talk with him about our mutual enthusiasm about deepening that relationship and strengthening it. I think that if we were to look at this as a before and after election kind of moment, which is somewhat arbitrary, I'd sort of say, because I think that our relationship on energy issues has been consistently strong. What we now call the Strategic Clean Energy Partnership was the Strategic Energy Partnership in the last administration, still, survived, was robust, and continues to be so. And we've never felt that there's been a problem at all in sort of restarting that and prioritizing that around the present administration's interests and priorities. I think that in our last 4 years and in the time since the last Indian election, we've seen nothing, I think, except for progress and success to see India go after what could be considered to be improbable clean energy targets and continue to succeed. It's not always easy. We know that there's a lot of reform that has to happen, and one of the issues we'll be talking about is how to improve implementation at the state level, I know today, and we think that's critically important, especially the work of CSIS, I think, has been stood out in that, certainly going back to when I was leading on U.S.-India climate cooperation in the Obama administration. I think that one of the great successes we've seen especially have been, for example, on the National Hydrogen Mission, clean energy manufacturing initiatives, solar electric vehicles, especially 2- and 3-wheelers, a beginning of an incredibly dynamic conversation on wind, and also I think some of the most interesting work that's being done on decarbonized fossil energy in the world today. In 2021, the president was very clear that this was an important and, again, one of the singularly most important relationships to him. And there, at his 2021 climate summit, launched the U.S.-India Climate and Clean Energy Agenda 2030 Partnership, for which the Strategic Clean Energy Partnership is the sort of the energy wing of that. We've got 5 robust pillars of work now in SCEP: power and energy efficiency, responsible oil and gas, renewable energy, sustainable growth, and emerging fuels and technologies, and 4 task forces under that, ranging from hydrogen to biofuels to energy storage. Those are going well. There's so many tracks of that, and it's led by Elena Thomas-Kerr in the front row over there is the lead in my office on this work, and so does a heroic amount of work every single day to keep all of that moving throughout our many interagency partners, not only with the State Department, but throughout the U.S. government. That we see nothing but potential to continue to build it. Also, I have to thank Ambassador Ranganathan in the front row as well. We launched just recently the newest kind of jewel, really, of this constellation, which is our RETAP program, our Renewable Energy Technology Action Platform, which was launched at our Deputy Secretary level last summer. Really cemented a full year of intensive collaboration that we had to help India get great success with their G20 presidency. And I want to just, I'll wrap this up, but I want to just say one quick thing on that. I used to negotiate targets for a living, and now I think I more negotiate like actual, brick and mortar things that actually get built now for a living, which is a wonderful task to have be able to participate in. The thing that I think in the energy world, most people on the target side have spent the most time talking about in the last 6 months, justifiably, was the agreement to triple renewables and double energy efficiency by 2030, which was a singular outcome of the Abu Dhabi COP, or the Doha COP, sorry. And the thing that's people forget is that was actually a target that was first introduced in the energy track under the G20, under India's leadership. We did not close that paragraph, but heroically the Indian government picked it back up, elevated it to leaders, and I haven't seen this in at least my time negotiating the G20, we're actually able to resuscitate that target and get it across the finish line for the leaders. And that is what made it possible for us to achieve that target in the COP process. One of the things that we're focused on now, and this stems very much from our cooperation with India, is we've made this year our year to focus on energy storage, a global energy storage target to accompany the tripling renewables and doubling efficiency target. Because what's really going to give the power to the tripling renewables target is if we're able to turn that into something that approximates baseload power that has to be done through storage, through smart grids, through other sort of things that we've worked on with India for decades now. So we introduced a target, got it across the finish line in the G7 for a 6-fold increase in long duration storage to 1,500 gigawatts by 2030, along with a commitment to invest in 10 million kilometers of new transmission lines around the world. This is again a global target. And we think with the support of partners like India, we can move that through the G20 and potentially into at least a good action agenda item for the Azerbaijan COP. So I think those are the kinds of things that we're at the top level looking at. We're immensely excited that we are going to continue to lead the Strategic Clean Energy Partnership with Minister Puri in the Ministry of Oil and Natural Gas. He's just been, Petroleum and Natural Gas, he's just been a tremendous partner. He and Secretary Granholm have one of the most interesting and I think closest relationships among energy ministers in the world. He will, again, be working with all the other energy ministries to move those along. And in that respect, we definitely looking forward to continuing our work with Minister Jitendra Singh and also welcoming Minister Qatar and Minister Joshi to that family of collaborative partnerships.
Now, there are many threads that both of you have laid it on the table for question and answers. But let me just pick up the first part. Last year, India saw a 5.4% increase in its power demand. Now, to meet the growing demand of India, we need a stable base load, and that's where the coal comes into the picture. Now, Ambassador Pyatt, you have been involved in the civil nuclear deal with India in 2005, and it's almost been 20 years. Is there anything on horizon? Is there a pathway for the first US-India civil nuclear deal so that there is an alternative to coal as a stable baseload supply?
So, a couple of quick thoughts with the caveat that I imagine this was also a topic for Mr. Doval and National Security Advisor Sullivan, so we'll see what came from there. First principle, this is a critically important piece of unfinished business in the bilateral strategic relationship. It's an issue on which President Biden was personally engaged as the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and it's a critical aspect of how we support India to meet India's own sustainable energy goals, as you said. I think there are two other significant developments here, and I had the opportunity to talk a little bit with Foreign Minister Jaishankar on this, and of course we went through the trenches on this because Jaishankar was Joint Secretary Americas when we were implementing the Hyde Act, the US-India joint effort before the IAEA, and all the other work we did together in the NSG and elsewhere. The two developments are as follows. One is, of course, that you're seeing the beginnings, I think, of a revolution in how people think about deployment of civil nuclear power, and in particular, the business model that is arising around small modular reactors. India should be a central player in the development of a global SMR supply chain. We have a shared interest in ensuring that China is not the principal deployer of new nuclear capacity as it is today. In this regard, I've had interesting conversations with Tata, with Reliance, with Birla, with Adani. All of India's big industrial power off-takers are looking at SMR technology as an avenue of future decarbonization. Making any of this happen would require a change to Indian law, in particular to remove the DAE monopoly on the operation of nuclear reactors. And I have spent enough time working on these issues around the US-India relationship to know that an American official sitting here in Washington is going to have pretty close to zero impact on the domestic debate that has to unfold in India around these questions. But I am also confident that the focus in this area that you have in the US government is echoed in the Indian government. That is, there's an understanding that the contours of the global nuclear power industry are shifting and will look different in the 21st century from what they looked like in the 20th century, which is when the DAE monopoly and India's nuclear structures were evolved. There's some hard issues that have to be resolved still around liability, and it would be a mistake to ignore those. But again, this is another question where it's not American officials making the case that are going to move the needle, or French officials for that matter. It's Indian companies and Indian corporate leaders. So I very much look forward to how the debate evolves on these issues. I would also know, again, back on the point about coalition politics, one, as Rick Rosso and I were talking about just before this session, Chandrababu Naidu was one of the important constructive voices as the Indian Parliament was going through the important deliberations that took place 2 decades ago now around the separation plan, around India's own legislative framework for implementing its obligations in the context of the U.S.-India civil nuclear deal. So I'm not going to give up on this because I think it's so important to both the strategic relationship between our countries, the way our political leadership, Andrew's bosses, my bosses, think about these issues. I mentioned President Biden, but because it involves President Biden at the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, it also significantly involved Secretary Blinken. And so we all recognize, we all understand the history and how much political capital multiple Indian and American governments have invested in this partnership. And it would be a real shame to just have that stay as a sort of chapter in the next book that Ashley Tellis writes about the strategic relationship, as opposed to being a real driver of energy transition in both of our countries.
I would say states, other than corporates, Indian states will also have a lot of role to play because the deployment of technologies are going to happen there. So, Dr. Light, Ambassador Pai talked about deployment of nuclear. India is also on the cusp of battery storage revolution. The prices which have been discovered in past couple of months in the state of Gujarat, the last one couple of weeks ago, it was almost 4.4 cents per unit. Under the RETAP mission, are there plans to bring Indian states into the CEP so that the benefits of US-India federal partnership is transferred down to them as well? And they also, they also have a role in this bilateral relationship.
Yeah, I think that they absolutely do. I think we've sort of have a bit of a dilemma, I think, when it comes to this cooperation. I mean, it is, I think that we've had some successes. Again, I mentioned the program that's run out of CSIS that was started in the Obama administration as one example, but I think that there's so much more that we could do, and there's so much more that needs to be done. If you take something like battery storage, we've just finished, for example, a 6-year program under the Partnership to Advance Clean Energy Research. It's actually the last PACE-R program, which is focused on battery storage and grid modernization. I think it's been very successful. That's something that I think of necessity. The way that sort of program is set up, it's one that sort of focuses more on research institutions, working with research institutions as well as the private sector. I think that we need to do some thinking on how we could do better with respect to bringing in the states. I think that we've got kind of 2 problems here. On the one hand, I think that there is often a hesitancy to allow the US federal government to be working directly with Indian states for reasons that are understandable to me. On the other hand, I think that we have a lack of capacity, with the one exception of California, for state-to-state cooperation. And so I think that this is something where I think looking into the next term of this administration, we'd want to sort of think about what we could do in order to expand the mandate and expand the possibility for partnerships between the 2 sides. One of the things that I had the great fortune of working on and helping to create back in 2010 is the US-India Track 2 dialogue on climate change and clean energy. And one of the things that we were doing as I was sort of leaving and getting into my current job was trying to stand up more of a state-to-state on the policy, just trading policy know-how between U.S. states and Indian states. And I think that that work tends to fall off once you get a federal government that's very excited about, supercharging our relationship. But I think that we need to invest more in those kinds of projects, and I think there's a lot of important things that can be done. As I said before, I don't think that there could be a more important thing for India and for the world other than to focus on storage. Like you said, there's the momentum, and there's also the unparalleled capacity for India to scale up solutions and drive down the price when they get a policy apparatus that supports and enables private sector innovation and investment.
Dr. Lai, to your point on, it's understandable that U.S. federal government engaging with Indian states is not an appropriate way to that's a relationship to progress. But what we have seen is when with UC Davis and UC Berkeley, CSIS, we led a delegation of California Energy Commission and California Public Utilities Commission to India, and there was an appetite for state-to-state interaction. So what I meant to ask was, can we have both US states and Indian states joining CEP? So there is a dialogue between the counterparts, which are the counterparts to each other? That's what I meant.
I think that we should be looking into ways that we can try to do that, for sure. And again, on the US side, it's more of a capacity problem, because very few of the US states, even some of the more innovative US states, they are so stretched thin. For good reasons now. We're putting billions and billions and billions of dollars into these economies, and hired 1,000 new people at the Department of Energy to get the money from Bill and Ira out the door. So they're doing a ton of implementation domestically. Now the question is, what could be done in order to give them more capacity through institutions like this to more meaningfully participate in something like SCEP?
I know our audience is waiting to ask questions, so I will ask one question before I switch over to a Q&A from the audience. There are a lot of initiatives which happen on the US-India side, and you mentioned different departments engaging in this. How do you manage the interagency coordination? How do you manage the interagency coordination? How do you manage the overlaps?
How do we manage it? Well, of course, the White House leads brilliantly on all interagency coordination. So I think that's the answer. We have great people. I mentioned Elena here. Some of Jeff's folks are in the audience too, who are really dedicated and who work very much to sort of make sure that we know what each other's doing. We still miss things, and I think that the problem with a country for which there is so much opportunity, again, not only for what can happen to help create a more energy secure India, a more energy independent India, which I think is absolutely essential. There's so much work that needs to be done there, and then the outsized impact that India can have on the global climate agenda just because of the size, right, of the country, and again, their ability to scale up solutions and drive down the cost. The only thing I think that we find challenging is often making sure that the different things that people innovate, the new great policy innovations that come up, don't trip up over each other. Because we also are putting a lot on the plate of our colleagues in the Indian national government to be responsive to these things. And so there's so many things that we try to get going. The question is to make sure that we don't overstretch their capacity as well and still make meaningful progress.
Just one additional quick point. First, building on Andrew's observation about the White House, it's really, really important that we've got many of these issues now housed underneath the ISET framework, because that's what really drives our process. Jake Sullivan, the National Security Council on our side, and then Mr. Doval and the Prime Minister's office driving the vast Indian bureaucracy. And then the other observation I'll make, this is 34 years in the Foreign Service for me. The longest I have lived anywhere in the world, including Washington, D.C., is actually in New Delhi. I've served 7 years total at that embassy. Our ambassadors and our missions abroad can play a hugely important role in sort of bringing together everybody. And I think we're fortunate to have Eric Garcetti as an ambassador in Delhi right now who really believes in these issues as a Californian. And when you talk to Eric, our India Climate and Energy Partnership is on his top 4 list or top 5, whatever it is, of priority issues. And I think that filters down to the consulates, which also, especially in the Indian case, plays such a critically important role, because I've spent enough time living in Delhi to understand how different it looks when you get to Bombay or Calcutta or Chennai or Hyderabad, and not to mention our soon coming consulate in Gujarat as well. So there's just a lot that we have to do as a government. But to maybe finish where I started out on this stuff, what's really going to drive the future of this relationship, and the biggest single change that's happened in the U.S.-India relationship over my 3 decades of involvement with it, is the rise of global Indian companies like Tata, and the hardwired instinct towards partnership with American counterparts that is so much part of where the Indian private sector is today. And so our job in government is to clear away the underbrush, the obstacles to that. I give great credit to David Mulford and the work that Ambassador Mulford did with Secretary Clinton and others to launch the CEO Forum along with Ratan Tata, and the real systematic focus on how to deepen and accelerate our commercial relationship. And as somebody who was serving at the embassy when Ambassador Blackwell gave his famous flat as a chapati speech, it is remarkable for me to look at the relationship today and see how deep and robust the economic and commercial relationship has become, which is the single thing that gives me the greatest confidence about the irreversible character of our relationship.
Now, okay, we already have our hands up in the audience. I would say the same thing. Please stand up, introduce yourself, and then ask the question. We'll take 2 questions at a time. We have 10 minutes for Q&A because we also have a second stellar panel on supply chains.
My name is Alulu, Fauzi Alulu. I'm from the DOE, EIA, Energy Information Administration. So, Dr. Light, I was about to jump to bail you out for that question, but you said it eloquently about the interagency activity and what we are doing with India. So lately we have been assigned through your office to help in managing the energy data in India through the U.S.-India Strategic Clean Energy Partnership. And we started really engaging with NITI Ayoga to really review some of their survey that I tried to design. And we gave them, it was last month, the institutional knowledge of EIA for 47 years. So for your office and also working with the Office of Ambassador Pathai, looking what they are doing, we are preparing to help them. It's really an interesting exercise, and it's really all roads leads to good data and transparency. And I think if you can really engage with your counterpart to emphasize on having good data and availability data, the investors, the policymakers, the analysts like us will be helpful to advance everybody's interest. Thank you.
I'm Arup Mitro. I look after the US office of Godavari Biorefineries. That's a Somaiya Group company from Mumbai, India. We are one of the leading companies of green chemistry, and we do a lot of work in India, and we are a global company. My point to the panel is, while all the strategic partnership and all the work that is going on, the Department of Energy grants for research and development, for example, in sustainable aviation fuel, it's very US-centric. I have looked at the various opportunities, and as I said, our company is a green chemistry leader, but there are many other companies in India as well. I think there could be potential benefit in making these grant programs more flexible so that companies from India, in the spirit of strategic cooperation, could participate initially from their base in India, but eventually you see the mid-sized companies, as you know, sir, you've been in India. I was with the Department of Commerce for 25 years in the US Embassy. I was a commercial specialist. So I know that the mid-sized companies are very eager to invest in America. Next week, the 100+ companies are coming for select USA delegation. So with that initial start from India, the mid-sized companies probably will get more energy and more confidence to step into the US market. So I know it's interagency, but these are the silos that we always try to break. So I just wanted to humbly make that submission.
We can take 2 questions to begin with.
Sure, I'll be very brief. Thank you very much for the comment on the importance of data. One of the things I know suggested we talk about, but didn't have time in the first round, but I will just briefly mention is, I think many of you know that President Biden and Prime Minister Modi are committed to finding a pathway for membership of India in the International Energy Agency. I think that maybe one question people say, well, what would India gain from IEA membership? Because I think actually the IEA will gain much more from Indian membership than maybe India will gain initially. But one of the things that would help a lot is the two traditional requirements for IEA membership are, of course, the stockholding requirement on oil. And India has a robust program now on oil stockholding, which I think could be improved with IEA participation. But just as importantly is data transparency and sharing data with the IEA. And I think that would actually help a lot as another sort of avenue for that. So we very much hope that India will be responding soon for the kind of the initial questionnaire that's done in that pathway. And I'll be getting a readout of that next week when I'm at the IEA Governing Board meeting. But I also think, for what it's worth, no one asked, but I don't think that the IEA can truly be an agency that has international breadth and reach and influence until it includes membership of countries like India. On the other side, I'd sort of say that one of the limitations for sure, even though they are world historic in their breadth and scope and depth of the bipartisan infrastructure legislation and the Inflation Reduction Act, is how much they are domestically focused. They don't include much, if any, money actually for funding outside of US borders. We don't need to debate that now. But I think that what we are trying to do very much in the Department of Energy is to spin up as much as we possibly can opportunities for foreign investment. We've seen that with our Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, has just announced in the last, I guess, 6 months now, or less, 33 projects that you can see on the website that are places where you can see an investment. I think that we absolutely, for all the reasons Jeff just mentioned, you know, the magic word here, supply chains, because of the critical role that India can play in diversification of supply chains, we do need to figure out in the coming months, years, how we can better create opportunities for creating joint ventures, creating all kinds of vehicles that would make this more of a two-way street. I absolutely agree with you.
Ambassador Pyatt, before you answer, just wanted to add one thing. Dr. Light mentioned about IEA. There is also International Solar Alliance, which US joined in 2021. So what's happening in that alliance? What has been the US role there?
So very quick, so we can move through more questions. ISA remains a priority, I think in particular to understand, and both Andrew and I, every time we're in Delhi, every time we're at a COP or elsewhere engaging with ISA partners, particularly important as we think about Africa. And I was just in Angola last week, which was another reminder to me of how critically important our engagement in sub-Saharan Africa is. I know Andrew's team, Andrew's boss, Dave Turk, was just in Nairobi as well. The deployment of technologies like solar in sub-Saharan Africa is not going to look like what Dominion Power or AES are doing here in Virginia. And so ISA fills a critical gap in terms of scaling the business case for clean power deployment to be suitable to developing countries and the marketplace that a country, for instance, in sub-Saharan Africa would demand. And then I just want to reinforce Andrew's point about the strategic importance of the joint effort that our governments are engaged in terms of India's future membership in the International Energy Agency. I actually think we have a unique confluence of personalities right now, which makes this feasible. Fatih Birol at the agency is strongly focused on India. Javed Ashraf, who was Jai Shankar's Director Americas when Jai was Joint Secretary Americas, is ambassador in Paris and has been a leading voice on these issues. And then I think at both DOE and at the State Department, there is an understanding of the strategic benefit that would come from bringing India into the agency. And this is just like every other regime issue that we have dealt with, whether the IAEA, Nuclear Suppliers Group, take your pick. There's an international architecture that was laid out in a different era when India was not the globally consequential partner that it is today. We're going to have to work on this issue in the same way we worked on these other regimes. India is going to have to make the case to the rest of the membership of these multilateral organizations, and then the organizations are going to have to figure out how they digest in India, which is the largest country in the world, huge population, and it's never going to fit into the same parameters that one might be accustomed to for any other country. So it's a really important strategic priority. I know for the State Department, certainly for Secretary Blinken, Deputy Secretary Campbell, and very proud of the partnership that State and DOE have maintained in pursuing that goal.
2 more questions.
Boy, ExxonMobil. It's great to see you guys together. You're like the dynamic duo wherever you go. I see you. And I would just say that when the Biden administration came to power, energy was really a friction point in the relationship with India because of the shift that the Biden administration wanted to make. And I would give you two credit and all your great staffs for really not only managing that friction, getting through it, but expanding the partnership. And I think energy is now a core element of cooperation between our two countries, and almost certainly inevitable. But even if you achieve all of the lofty objectives that you have in store, and India achieves its renewable targets and even makes headway on its efficiency targets, India is still on a path to be the world's largest emissions emitter. And India is still growing its manufacturing. As its economy grows, manufacturing grows, energy intensity grows, emissions are going to grow. That's inevitable. And so what we need is a little bit more ambition, I think, in the next administration. Hopefully we'll see you guys in that one as well, to really tackle heavy industry in the hard-to-abate sectors, because that's something that even the Indian government doesn't have a handle on. Green hydrogen is a nice concept, but it's not really scalable in an economic way in the foreseeable future. So I think, industry is eager to work with the administration and the Indian government and Indian partners, Indian business partners, to tackle that bigger challenge. Thanks.
Thanks, Peter. Just real quickly on that, maybe to respond. First of all, acutely aware that of that non-Chapati-like $200 billion U.S.-India trade relationship today, a huge portion of that overall relationship is energy products and energy technologies. So it's really important that we get this right. Like Andrew, very bullish on the partnership with Minister Puri in the Ministry of Oil and Natural Gas, and the fact that Hardeep has been as focused as he has been on the decarbonization of India's traditional energy streams and exploring opportunities for technologies like carbon capture, but also looking at how to accelerate fuel switching to gas as part of getting at that industrial problem that you mentioned, and then accelerating clean hydrogen as fast as possible. I think the question, I do not know Minister Joshi. I think the question of how India approaches its own decisions on coal is going to be critically important. And as we talked about from the first question, I have learned long ago not to walk into South Block and start my presentation talking about the critical importance of coal phase out. But I think India's own choices about how it gets out of coal and reduces its dependence on coal are going to have a significant impact on whether or not we're able to keep 1.5 degrees within reach, and the consequences for India's own citizens from a dramatically changing climate. So I think this is an area where we see lots of opportunity, I think, for deepening the dialogue and then helping to leverage the technological capacity that India demonstrates across so many different industrial lines to deliver the power that Indian industry needs in a more sustainable way.
Can you?
Thank you, guys.
Oh, yeah. Can you please stand up, introduce yourself?
Sure. Is the mic working? Awesome. My name's Shayla Gibson. I'm with the Cato Institute. Quick question, since I know we're at time. Thank you for this great conversation. It's been very informative. You mentioned a couple issues of this exponential, awesome, unique growth, like liability, supply chain diversification, implementation of policy at the state level, coalition politics, capacity building. My question is, and it's kind of related to the gentleman from ExxonMobil, what challenges do you anticipate happening as you continue to build out this coalition between industry and government? Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for speaking to us. My name is Pranav. I'm a rising senior at Yale, interning at the Pakistan desk at State, and thank you so much. My question is, when it comes to the advanced batteries discussions that you're having with India, what kinds of technologies are you most excited by? Is it sodium ion? Is it flow batteries? What kinds of technologies are most promising in these discussions?
Maybe I'll start with you, Pranav. First of all, congratulations on the internship. Great move. My first job in the State Department was 1984 as an intern in the Bureau of Inter-American Affairs, so you've got a great future ahead of you. And then on the battery question, I think the issue that I'm most focused on, Andrew will have the technological response. State Department hugely focused on China's controls over gallium, germanium, and graphite, and what that says about China's willingness to instrumentalize its near monopoly in certain key battery minerals in order to extract political influence. I think we understand that we can't, we have to innovate our way out of the dependency that we have with China today on these issues. That is to say, China's near monopoly over the processing of so many of these battery minerals is so significant that the best way to overcome it is the work that's being done in our laboratory on vanadium flux batteries, or take your pick of alternative technology. And I will defer to Andrew and all of his scientists to pick a favorite in that. I would say over the shorter term, I mentioned earlier graphite. We see a particular opportunity for India working with us through the Mineral Security Partnership to be an important contributor to how we diversify the supply chain, especially for graphite. And there are a number of Indian companies, including Tata, that are working in this area. We would love to see new investments, and the demand factor in the U.S., combined with the U.S. willingness to use a very rigorous regime of tariffs and trade preferences, creates a real opportunity for Indian business to sell into the U.S. market, working with OEMs, our battery manufacturers, but also OEMs in places like Japan and Korea in order to grow market share. And then what do I worry about on India? It's just everything is hard. It's, the politics is complicated. Our politics is complicated. I came to India first in 1992. I remember one of the first books that sort of shaped my thinking about the country was V.S. Naipaul, Million Mutinies Now. That sort of challenge remains the case, but it's also a country that is dramatically transformed because of its connectedness, because of technology. I think the most exciting thing, here's my literary survey for the day. If you haven't read Q&A, worth reading for an insight into the sort of changing sociology of an India where the barriers of caste and social structure have been shattered by technology, and what it means to have hundreds of millions of Indians who live in small cities that you and I have never heard of, suddenly connected to the global economy, but with the aspiration to imagine, going to an IIT and going to work for a company like Tata or ExxonMobil, and the contributions that come from that, incredibly, incredibly powerful, and rests on the foundation of our shared democracy, which is the single most important determinant of the strategic alignment of our countries.
I'll be very, very brief. My scientists are politically savvy enough not to pick winners in public. But it's a sort of an all of the above. I don't want to hedge by saying all of the above, but I do think that we've got a number of potential that came out of PACE-R. There's a number of different, very promising technologies. The question is what can go cheapest, fastest, which will be partly a question of investment more than anything else, and also security of supply on critical minerals, but also applications. So to go back to Peter's point, I mean, again, if you know the sort of the electric arc world and what is sort of most promising there with respect to, for example, decarbonizing the steel sector. That would give you one indication of what I would sort of say, if I felt more free to say it publicly, of some of the technology that I'm watching the closest, which I think is most important in the grand scheme of things. And then I couldn't agree with Jeff more. I just have to say that there is no insurmountable barrier. It is just that things are hard in our system, things are hard in the Indian system. The question is, how many points of contact can we make? How many person-to-person connections can we make? When I first started traveling extensively in India many years ago, I would sort of say that what has always impressed me, that Jeff sort of alluded to, was sometimes the stark difference between the conversations that you would have in Delhi and the conversations you would have right in the villages, where the grand climate politics that's overshadowed our relationship since 1992 melt away when you're actually having conversations with people who are trying to build things in their garages with their friends who also came out of the IITs or wherever and are committed to trying to find solutions together. And that's where you hear people kind of go, look, we got rid of the British. We can do anything if we really set our mind to it. And so if there is a country that must decouple its economic growth from its growth in greenhouse gas emissions, it's India. If there is a country that can actually do it because it's got the political will and the technological savvy to do it, it's also India.
We are 5 minutes away from the next panel, so I would like to ask both of you about your closing remarks, but I would also want to mention a couple of opportunities which exist between US and India for engagement. The first is the Prime Minister's 10 million rooftop, which is going to create a humongous demand for solar panels in India. And second is about the Flexible Resources Initiative, Ambassador Pyatt, which ENR is initiating. So I would quickly ask both of you in 2 minutes to give your remark on this future of US-India clean energy partnership, and how do you see in next 4 years and 5 years this cooperation and competition, because both countries are trying to shore up their manufacturing for clean energy. And this will also be a good segue for us to go into the next panel where we'll have DFC, Tata Power, and First Solar to discuss. So, Ambassador Pyatt, over to you first.
So first on the competition versus cooperation point. I mean, the United States has a strategic interest in an India which is prosperous, stable, driving forward its energy pathway in the least climate damaging way possible. So I don't see a competition element. And again, both Andrew and I have this global portfolio, and it's been one of the most interesting things about my role is you travel around the world and you get a feel for how the global energy map is shifting, but also geopolitics and geoeconomics is shifting. It's clear the Asia-Pacific region is going to be the focal point for a lot of American interests as we look to the next century. And within that Asian and Asia-Pacific and Indo-Pacific context, we have our anchors of our treaty allies, countries like Australia, Korea, Japan, but we also have a huge and consequential partner in India. That is why I'm so incredibly proud of the work that I was part of in the 90s and early 2000s around the nuclear deal, because it was that deal that unlocked the potential of our democracies and sort of cleared away the underbrush and cleared away the greatest single obstacle to us thinking about each other as partners. We're never going to be allies. I think everybody in Washington who works on the India issue understands that. But India itself becoming a more consequential regional and global player is actually good for American interests. And again, I was just in sub-Saharan Africa, and you see the role that Indian companies play there. We would much rather see Indian companies leading the way on energy deployment than to have China coming in with billions of dollars of more debt-trap diplomacy and the extractive model that China has brought, which has done so much damage to the interests of countries in sub-Saharan Africa. So I don't worry about the competition at all. I think it's really a matter of how we capture opportunities. And here's where I really want to commend organizations like CSIS that are helping us to shape a policy menu which delivers the openings that expand the opportunities for companies like Tata and ExxonMobil and Tesla and GE to expand the cooperation that's going on between our firms, because that is what is going to both create the constituency for our strategic relationship, but also create the opportunities that our citizens expect.
Dr. Andrew Light?
I guess I'll very briefly just allude to the great next uncertainty in this relationship, which is what happens here in November or December or whenever we know like who our next president is. But I think that that's the one thing I've told friends, like the one thing we'll know for sure is on an election day we will not know who's president. So that's one thing you can put in the bank. I mean, it's like it's going to be close. I think that what I would hate, let me put it this way, what I would hate to see is a narrowing of the agenda, right? I know that that our administration, if we were to get another term, would want to continue to expand the map of cooperation. And it's because of the universe of need, of the universe of opportunity that you have with a country like India. And I think that is something that we would want to do, and we'd want to try to figure out how to do it smarter and faster and hopefully with more resources than we have to do it now. So I don't think there's a big difference in the playbook. It's just a question of how we can execute that playbook more effectively at bigger scale, because whatever we can do will always be small compared to what is the universe of opportunity in a country like India. What I would hate to see is that another administration would narrow that focus. And I think that I'm not going to make an argument for why I think that would be a mistake now, other than I think that it would essentially not take advantage of the incredible range of relationships we could have on the private sector side, which are much broader than any particular sector of energy. But I think what will mitigate it is the fact that India is so different now. It is a leader in the G20. Hopefully it will become a leader in the International Energy Agency. We have the Quad in place, where we have an enormous amount of opportunity, which has mostly been, rich discussions, but is sort of waiting for that opportunity where, us and India and Australia and Japan can really find something. Maybe it's critical minerals, maybe it's something else, where we really dig in and work together. And I think that will hopefully, whatever the political future is in this country, will continue to help anyone who takes India seriously as an energy partner to see that their status and their role and their influence is something that you cannot you don't want to narrow the horizon down. You want to actually play as big on the field as you possibly can. I just think that's the smartest thing to do, and hopefully that will dictate the way we look at energy diplomacy moving forward.
Thank you, Dr. Light. On this note, I would give a big round of applause and thank you to our panelists. Now, the next panel will be moderated by Ms. Neelama Jain, who is a senior fellow non-resident with CSIS. And we'll have Dr. Praveer Sinha from Tata Power, Mr. Jake Levine from DFC, and Mark Widmer from First Solar.
Excuse me, everybody. We're going to begin the next panel in just a second here. If you could find your seats. I'm serious. Hey, Gaurav, Akanksha, can you guys run around? Start getting people? Yeah. Oh, thanks. Yep.
Okay. Wow. The best example is that's right. All right, you gonna be around?
Okay, let's start. Good morning, everyone. I'd appreciate if you all settle down on your seats. Good morning. It's an important topic that we are discussing today, and I think your presence underscores the importance of the topic. US and India bilateral cooperation in greening the trade and investment ties. I'm Neelima Jain. I'm a senior fellow with the India chair here at CSIS, and I'm so thrilled to moderate this session. As we gather here, the US and India are facing pressing imperatives. For the US, they recognize that their competitors are making heavy investments and dominating the global energy markets. For example, the China already owns about 80% share in the cell and module manufacturing capacity in the world. And I think they also recognize the need for more and more agile and strategic development and trade financing. Similarly, India, on the other hand, is looking to have a more sustained, high, and inclusive growth. It's crucial. if it wants to become the global manufacturing hub. It also aspires to be the leading force for the Global South, to chart out how to navigate the low emission pathway while becoming this global hub for manufacturing. And I think it's not surprising that the climate and the trade agendas for the two countries have been converging. And we don't have to look any further than the US International Development Finance Company, which has been making some notable geostrategic investments in clean energy, and including the financing of First Solar's manufacturing capacity for about $500 million in India, and also about $425 million financing for Tata Solar cell and module manufacturing in the state of Tamil Nadu in India. How can this convergence be sustained, replicated, and how can US continue to be the leading partner in supporting India in its clean energy targets? We want to unpack this and more in this panel, and we have a very fantastic crew to support us and to explore these questions. Jake Levine, Chief Climate Officer of the DFC, who leads the agency's climate finance agenda and works closely with the government agencies to coordinate climate finance policy. Dr. Praveer Sinha, CEO and Managing Director of Tata Power, one of India's oldest and largest integrated power utility. Mark Widmer, CEO of First Solar, a leading American solar technology company. Very warm welcome to all of you. Our discussion is simple. The structure has 3 rounds of questions. Each of the panelists will get approximately 3 minutes to respond. And then the moderated discussion will be followed by question and answers with the audience. We will open the floor for 15 minutes. And then followed by, we will wrap up the session for about 10 minutes. So let's dive right in. Jake, DFC has been leading the charge in showcasing America's global energy leadership in development finance. And the 2 investments are a great example to that. Could you unpack for us this decision-making that happened on these 2 investments in DFC, and what attributes, what factors made these 2 companies attractive for investment, and especially the investment in the choice of the state of Tamil Nadu?
Well, absolutely, yes, I would love to do that. First, let me start by thanking you for hosting us, and to the team at CSIS. You guys have put together a wonderful event, and it's really an honor to be here in this beautiful space and amongst such esteemed company. I also want to thank Praveer and Mark. I couldn't be sharing the stage with 2 stronger advocates, both for scaling clean energy globally, but also for diversifying, de-risking, and really creating a more secure future for our clean energy supply chains. And I think that's sort of a key piece of my response to your question, which is to say that right now, one of the key issues in both climate and in geostrategy and politics is how do we ensure that we have a secure, reliable supply chain for clean energy that can power the clean energy transition, which will be determinative of economic outcomes around the world. DFC's mission, we were only constituted about 5 years ago in a statute called the BUILD Act by the US Congress. And in that statute, we received a critical mission, which was to support the financing of private sector enterprise in low-income countries around the world for the purpose of creating economic growth and also for advancing the US strategic interests around the world. And we see this agenda converging with the climate agenda, as we see the climate agenda sort of converging on everything, really, because of the way that it is so intertwined in our economic and development goals. But I think, to get to your specific question around why First Solar, why Tata Power, these are two companies that are innovating in so many critical areas, and let me just highlight a couple about each that were important for DFC's decision making. When you look at First Solar, to begin with, we completed our First Solar transaction first. I'll start with First Solar. And that was a transaction, $500 million corporate financing, that took DFC a extremely short amount of time because of the conviction that we had to work with Mark and First Solar. They were bringing an innovative technology outside the polysilicon technology vertical into the Indian market to help feed the tremendous demand and the need for new supply to go to work against this 450 gigawatt goal. And they were doing so in a way that was completely independent of the pressures that we found ourselves to be in terms of being beholden to a single country and single set of suppliers who have, as you say, 80% of the market share of this industry. And so we thought it was a perfect place to start for DFC's journey to begin diversifying this supply chain. We also were quite excited about the prospect of supporting First Solar in other areas and building a relationship with them first in India, but thinking about its presence in Malaysia, in Vietnam, the synergies that are going on with First Solar's work in the United States under the IRA, and the entire picture of how the Biden administration is supporting this overall industrial strategy. Tata Power presented a slightly different set of opportunities, but no less important, which was to say that they began thinking about how do you actually confront head-on this supply chain, this polysilicon and crystalline supply chain, and diversify. Now, they've begun with cells and modules, but we were compelled by the need to, number one, gain a foothold at the cell and module level where you could begin to diversify in a meaningful way at scale, and to use that foothold to think about not only, number one, moving upstream over time into wafers, ingots, polysilicon, as we now see happening in various markets around the world, including in the United States, but also, and Praveer and I had a chance to talk about this a little bit this morning, really excited about this, is thinking about the corporate strategic relationship of building a partnership with such an important company like Tata in India that is working to green and decarbonize and de-risk supply chains in the electric mobility space, in the industrials sector, in a whole host of areas that are critical to this theme of de-risking and diversification. There have been some wonderful surprises that we've also discovered along the way in terms of the empowerment of women in the workplace, and in terms of, I think, in both cases, the achievements that First Solar and Tata Power have made on environmental sustainability. And I'd be happy to get into those down the line, but I feel that I may have overstepped my 3-minute intro, so I'll stop there and want to say thanks again.
It's very impressive to hear how holistic your approach has been on investment, and especially, I was reading about it, in terms of how this investment has encouraged participation of women in the local area to be part of the manufacturing capacity. It's very impressive. Dr. Sinha, as said by Jake as well, Tata Power has been at the forefront of India's clean energy transition. You've been consistently innovating. What role do you see for foreign investment compared to the domestic investment in driving your company's vision? And ultimately, in what role do foreign investments play in clean energy transition for India?
Thank you, Nilima, and thank you, Jake, and the whole team over here who has given us the opportunity to come and speak. And thank you, CSIS and Rick, for having me for the first time to CSIS. It's exciting times, and I think the conversations that we saw early in the morning talking about the climate change and the relationship that is there between US and India, especially in terms of how do we transition the energy usage in the country. And to put it in perspective, India has a very ambitious plan, 500 gigawatt of non-carbon by 2030, and nearly 300 gigawatt of renewable that has to be set up in the next 7 years. And when we looked at it a few years back, we said that we are an integrated power company. Even in the renewable space, we develop our own renewable projects, solar projects, we do rooftop solar, we do solar pumps. And it's very important that we have a supply chain which ensures that we do not have to depend on an outside country to supply us what we want to use in our country. And that's the time we started looking at it. If at that time, India used to import nearly 10 gigawatt of solar modules mostly from China, but also a small quantity from Southeast Asia. And if we have to transition and get into some 30 to 35 gigawatt capacity addition every year, it's very important that we become self-sufficient. And that's where we said that we'll set up a state-of-the-art solar cell and module factory. Incidentally, this was not something new for Tata Power. The first solar cell and module factory that Tata Power set up with PP was way back in 1992. Not many people globally would have believed that something like this will happen, but well, that was the time we thought we should have the leadership in thought and action, and went and set up the solar module and cell factory. But this was big. This was 4 gigawatt. This was actually now 4.3 gigawatt. And what we were trying to do was not only to cater to our own captive requirement, but also to see that how we can supply to others within the country, other utilities, other developers, but also to see if we can do some supply outside the country, especially to US. And we have been in touch with many of the partners over here to see if we can supply some of these modules in US market and establish a very solid supply chain linkage so that we cooperate and collaborate to bring the best technologies to other partners globally, especially to US. Our partnership with DFC has been very unique because that gave us the opportunity to showcase that how development initiatives are not just local programs, but it is also cross-border. How do we get partners across the world who believe in the same philosophy of transition, who believe that we have a common agenda and a common goal of bringing universal access of energy. We did hear Andrew Light talking about that it's not about just doing some of the things in India, but it was also about doing things in places where universal access of energy is not there. We are looking for opportunities that how we can reach out some of these solutions. And mind you, these solutions have to be affordable solutions. They cannot be very expensive solutions. In sub-Saharan Africa, where again, energy poverty is there and people do not have access. So I think we are looking at it in a very, very holistic manner, not looking at very myopic, just India-centric, but also looking at how do we cater this technology and this manufacturing facility that has been created to cater to other global markets also where there's a necessity of a product and people are looking to have a wider choice of supply chain rather than getting concentrated to one country. You mentioned about the diversity that we had. When we set up the plant, we thought that we need to be a little different than compared to other places. And we took a very ambitious target that out of the nearly 2,000 operators, can we have women operators? And today we have more than 80% of the operators who are women operators, and they come from nearby areas. And all of them are absolutely raw in the sense they were not earlier doing any job like that. So we had the added responsibility of training them right from safety to operation to technology, and then making them operate these plants. And today, Our module plant is operating at 100%, and thanks to the women operators who are working over there. So I think when we create these new facilities, it's not just creating a manufacturing, but how do we create an ecosystem where you get partners from different areas and who can make a difference to the lives of the people over there.
No, thank you. That's a great example for a just development-led growth. So kudos to both of you. Mark, First Solar, again, has been a global leader in solar technology with over 25 gig of modules being exported across the world. Have I got the number right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So how does India fit in your global vision? And do you have one or two advisors for people, for global supply chain OEMs or global companies who are looking to invest in India? How can they leverage local supply chain and local talent?
Yeah, first off, pleasure to be here and with this panel. It's great to share some insights and perspectives around the opportunity that's in front of us, because I'm very excited around India as an opportunity and globally how it can play into the long-term opportunity this industry has, which we're still very much in the early innings. When you think about India as a market for us and an overall attractiveness, first off, I'll start off with a standpoint of it had a great strategic vision, right? It had an intent. It knew exactly what it was trying to do. It was aspirational. It was setting goals for its own long-term energy independence and security, what it was trying to aspire to. And then it also established a policy environment that it enabled you to have confidence to make the investment. As a multinational, to go into India and to have a policy environment that had a demand initiative around it, had a focus around creating domestic capability in a supply chain, had a opportunity to say, let's just create a level playing field that all can compete on their own merits. And then when you look at the ease of doing business, the other thing that we were very happy with is that the ability to do business in India over the last decade or so has changed dramatically. So to make this investment, and for us, it was about a $600-700 million investment, of which $500 million was obviously through our partnership with DFC, that was used to fund that, but a meaningful investment, and you have to have confidence that you have the ability to get a return on that investment. And then you couple that with, well, what is our overall strategy and how do we differentiate ourselves? And we'll refer to them as our points of differentiation. One is we're a vertically integrated manufacturing process. So within the four walls of a production facility, we make everything, right? There is no other dependency of a supply chain other than what happens within the four walls of the factory, but for our bill of material. So we needed to find good, high-quality local partners for our glass, as an example, for our frames, which are steel and steel partners that we have, and for some of the other basic bill of materials. And we were very happy with those types of partnerships that we've been able to establish in India, and almost to a point of a sponsorship. We've developed deep relationships with our partners, like Saint-Gobain, who's our glass supplier, who's been in India for about 50 years and really become a sponsor for us within the market. We work very closely with TVS, which is another large company that's got a 100-year history in the state of Tamil Nadu, and that we've leveraged their capabilities and learnings to help us, right, as kind of a mentor for us. And those are really invaluable relationships, and to enable a company like First Solar to come in to India and then to achieve its long-term commitments and objectives. Then it was the talent of the workforce. I mean, I've got work to do because we only have about 40% of our associates are female. 80% is phenomenal. But the talent and the skills that we've been able to see in India is beyond any of our expectations, of which we'll continue to leverage that on a global basis to the engineering skills in particular. We're starting up factories in Alabama and Louisiana. We're leveraging those associates to come over and help start those factories up as well, because there's that kind of deep talent and capability and passion that we've been able to see in the associates that we've hired. So what I would say is, for any other company that was aspiring to make a significant investment into India, is to develop deep partnerships and relationships with the local communities and those that have been there before you, and ultimately try to evolve to a point where you're looked upon as an Indian company, you don't want to be looked upon as a foreign entity. You want to be looked upon as if you're part of India's economy and its overall partnership, and you're enabling their long-term strategic intent. The state of Tamil Nadu, I think, is trying to increase its GDP. Right now, it's about 350 million or so, billion, excuse me, and they want to get to 1 trillion. They have a real strong interest of attracting more foreign direct investment. And they're going to do what they can to help ensure that long-term success. And so I think now is probably the best time. Prior to my current company, we put a factory in Pondicherry about 20-some years ago. And I can just tell you that it's changed dramatically to where it is right now. And so there's probably no better time for a multinational to make a decision to invest in India right now.
That's great, great message. Thank you.
Just one point. The construction of your factory was done by Tata Projects, which I chair.
That's convergence right there. I want to, dive deep into some of the challenges and opportunities, right? So, Jake, do you anticipate, or what challenges, immediate challenges, you anticipate in financing and investments that one would make in India?
I think that there are. I actually think, generally speaking, it is a hugely dynamic and rich market with a tremendous number of opportunities. And when I look across the board at all of the markets in which DFC is working, I don't think of India as a market that is chock full of challenge, because there are so many great opportunities. But with that said, let me highlight what I think are 2 challenges that we do encounter generally, and including in India. One is a policy challenge, and one is a financing challenge. On the policy side, notwithstanding the fact that even in these transactions, we are primarily motivated by and doing the work of diversification of a supply chain, we still encounter an enormous amount of nexus with suppliers, with value chains, with companies that present policy challenges from the perspective that they are dominated by single source, potentially companies that have human rights concerns in the second, third, and upstream tiers of a supply chain. And so even when you think about producing solar cells and modules, you worry about, well, where are the ingots and the wafers coming from? Where is the polysilicon coming from? Where is the machinery that's producing the product coming from? And that's a challenge that is a long-term game. And I think, Mark put it well, even though First Solar is somewhat insulated from this particular challenge, we are in like the first or second inning here, to use a U.S. baseball analogy. I'm not sure what the cricket corollary would be, but maybe Pravir can help us with that. But it's early days. And so I think one thing that I always try to reiterate to my colleagues who are worried about these types of challenges is that this is going to take time. The dominance that we see coming from China in, not just in solar, by the way, but in every single clean energy vertical, including in the critical minerals processing that is so key to the inputs of so many of these products, from batteries to wind turbines to electrolyzers and on and on. That is the result of decades of clear industrial policy, of the kind of manipulation of markets and unfair trade practices, unfair labor practices that have made it possible to get to 80%, 95% in some cases of the parts of these value chains. And so in order for us to have a realistic view of how to unwind that and start diversifying in a meaningful way, of building this US-India bilateral relationship with that as a key pillar that will inform both of our industrial and trade policies, we also have to be realistic that this is going to take some time. Now, I think one thing that's been encouraging, you look at DFC's investments, 500 million for First Solar 425 with Tata Power. That's almost $1 billion that will have an outcome of almost, let's see, 7.5 gigawatts of module production in the solar sector. 7.5 gigawatts is nothing to sneeze at. I mean, that represents, in many cases, the national output of major economies. And so it will take time, and it's doable. So that's one challenge. The second challenge from the financing perspective is that when you think about what these projects require in terms of CapEx and in some cases operating costs or corporate financing needs, there is a real cost of capital challenge that we face, and that is also wrapped up in a challenge of providing financing in a local currency. And while the Indian market is deep in terms of its commercial banks, it's not deep enough to finance on its own the 500 gigawatts of deployment that it has set as its target. And so we need to find a way for foreign investment, for institutional investors from outside of India to come in at scale in a competitive way. And to do that with a foreign currency hedging requirement is hard. It's something that we're working on now to be able to try to provide financing in rupees. But it's going to cost money. It's going to require some degree of subsidy from somewhere. And that's a challenge that we will be working on, I think, for some time from a financing perspective.
Interesting. Dr. Sinha, how are policies such as the Inflation Reduction Act being viewed by the Indian industry? Do they see that as an opportunity to invest in the US? Or do you think it's a challenge for them that may affect their competitiveness?
I think when we look at the Inflation Reduction Act or the PLI, we look at it from more, not from competition, but from collaboration perspective. And I think what is important is to understand that how do you make a cohort of investors or developers who work together to learn from each other. To start with, I think we'll work with Mark that what are the best practices that they are doing, whether it is in terms of safety, in terms of environment-related issues, or it is in terms of the operational capability and training programs that they have and what we have and how we can learn from each other. The supply chains that Mark mentioned, I think that's another area. Can we have common supply chains? Can we get economies of scale? Because when we are talking about 7.5 to 8 gigawatt of manufacturing, if you provide to the ancillary units that sort of capability, you can develop n number of, and these are small and medium manufacturing plants that can come up. And so it has a cascading impact. Similarly, under the IRA, there are a large number of factories which are coming up over here. And this is not only in the space of solar modules and cells, but it is also in terms of various other areas in clean energy, especially we talked about batteries and how do we make storage a very important part of it. And the type of work that is happening, especially in the storage space, will make the infirm power firm. And that's what is the requirement, because whenever we discuss and the decarbonization story comes, the question that comes is how quickly you will be able to move away from the carbon-related or brown fuel to green fuel, and how do we make this firm power 24/7 and not only for certain hours of the day. So I think the Inflation Reduction Act is giving a lot of impetus to the whole ecosystem of clean energy, and that's where I think it would be very important, because when we are talking about the clean energy transition, it is not just about solar or wind or battery or demand response or demand side. It's everything is and that is where I think we are working with some of the companies in US who are part of the larger ecosystem of creating clean energy solutions in totality and not on standalone basis. The second thing, I think, is also the breakthrough technologies, the disruptors that will happen. While traditionally we have been going through the route of the ingots and the wafers and the cell and module, can we have some breakthrough technologies? One of the breakthrough technologies is the thin film. Can we have peroxides? Can we have organic? Can we have other alternate materials which can help us to look at a manufacturing process which is much smarter, much simpler, and also low cost. So I think there are a whole lot of accrued benefits that can come, and also the whole supply chain initiative. So I think these are little early days in terms of what sort of supply chain we can have, and we can collaborate with the US industry on that, and what sort of supply chains can happen in India. So we don't have to, everyone doesn't have to reinvent the wheel. We can work with each other and leverage so that we become more efficient and more economical.
Excellent. So the bottom line is that IRA is an opportunity for Indian industry. Mark, what would you, when you look at the challenges currently, if any, that exist, in your operations in India, what are the one or two policy or regulatory actions that you recommend Government of India should prioritize?
First off, when I look at, I used to even say before IRA, when you really want to look at who's getting it right from a policy standpoint, and we mainly focus on three primary markets, Europe, US, and India. India was a leader, in my mind, as it relates to their policy and how they were thinking longer term of creating a domestic industry, right, that could align in terms of its longer term strategic objectives that it was, targeting. And so I think from a policy environment, India has been a leader. And then the US caught up with IRA, and Europe, unfortunately, is still really struggling, trying to figure out a really enduring policy that companies would be comfortable making meaningful investments in the European Union at this point in time. What I would say India needs is consistency. We've seen, the policies already at times, and it's not unnatural when you're looking at kind of this transition that you're trying to make, somewhat decoupling yourself from your historical PV supply chain and trying to create your own domestic capabilities. There's that evolution can be a little bumpy. And, so one of the policies that India had, they had both trade and non-trade policies, and they had the approved list of module manufacturers, which was another way to basically address certain technology to make sure that it meets minimum standards that would allow it to be utilized in the India market. And they basically gave a moratorium, similar to what we unfortunately did here in the US for a period of time. When we determined that there was circumvention in Southeast Asia, we gave a 2-year moratorium, right? Even though the rule of law said that, they were circumventing and they were competing on an unfair playing field, but we allowed it to continue for a period of time. I mean, India had done something very similar with its approved list of module manufacturers. It basically gave a moratorium on that. Now it has put that back in place. So that's very, very positive, because you've got to stay committed. You've got to have an intent, and you have to stay committed to it, because otherwise people will be gun shy around making those investments, because if the policies aren't enduring and predictable and stable, our factory, which, and I will give Kabir and his Tata Projects a lot of credit, because we got our factory up and running in less than 24 months. And with Tata Projects helping lead that way, but it's a 24-month journey. And it's in a timeline for a payback against that investment that is going to be 10, 12, 15 years, right, is what you'd expect to have against that investment. It has to be enduring, the policy environment. So I think the one thing is be transparent, stay committed to the policies, and then allow the natural evolution to take place, because it will happen. If you have a stable, predictable environment it will be enduring. If you don't, you're going to get a lot of people either not willing to commit, or people will change their direction because of the uncertainty of the viability, or the enduring aspect of the policy environment.
I'll dive into the third round with a common question, and then we can open the floor for Q&A. What clean energy areas or sectors hold the most promise in the next 3-4 years for US and India collaboration? Jake, we'll start with you, and then Dr. Sinha and Mark.
Gosh, this is the possibilities of how to answer this question are limitless. So let me focus on just a couple things. One is, I think we will see an enormous amount of deployment and innovation in India and in partnership between the US and India in the clean energy sector and in a range of mitigation technologies ranging from solar to wind to electric vehicles. I think, and I don't want to be overly repetitive here, but I can't underscore enough how exciting the partnership on the production and the manufacturing of the supply chain is for these types of technologies and projects. And so the focus area that we will have as we continue investing in at the project level and in certain funds that are actually doing the deployment is focusing on the clean energy supply chain and the manufacturing of products in solar, in wind, in batteries, in vehicles. That's one. But the other thing is, and I think that this is an area that is unique to the US-India relationship and unique to the kind of innovation that we're seeing in the climate sector in India, which is also a response to the needs and the impacts that are already being felt, is what is happening on adaptation. And especially in rural and ag-focused parts of the Indian economy. I want to mention one thing that DFC had nothing to do with, but which was quite impressive that I noticed last week, which was that during one of the many record heat waves that has occurred in the last month or so around the world, there was a payout which was engineered by Swiss Re, by the Center for Resilience, and the I'm blanking on the organization in India. It is the SEWA, Women's Alliance. SEWA, thank you. That essentially achieved a first of its kind parametric insurance payout, which was triggered by a certain temperature reading, which then created automatic payments to women, in particular farmers, who then received a deposit in their bank account that allowed them to make certain choices about whether they were going to continue to work that day, whether they were going to go home and rest and stay cool, about whether they were going to send their kids to school. That kind of choice is a gift. And it's unfortunate that in certain markets and certain places, it's not available all the time and it costs money. But to have institutional investors, to have civil society organizations coming together, and DFC has been a part of designing certain of these programs with some of our partners, with an organization called Insure Resilience, for example, that we've invested in, with our work through the Adaptation and Resilience Investment Collaborative and others. But this was a remarkable example of innovation and also remarkably and badly needed. And I think that we will continue to see innovations in this vein, whether it's in terms of weather forecasting and the use of data and analytics to provide better resources to working people and to farmers who are feeling the impacts of climate change, whether it's around protection of the cold chain and reduction of post-harvest losses by using better cooling technologies and logistics platforms that can create better markets for supply and demand. That's a really exciting area of innovation. It's one that we're focused on. It's totally different than the work that we're doing with First Solar and Tata Power, but no less important.
That's fascinating. Dr. Sinha?
I think when we talk of power, one of the most important aspects is the reliability of power supply. And we need to work around that in terms of, while the green energy is great, how do we make it 24/7 or available when you want it? And I think to bring the reliability, the storage has to play a very important role. We talked about, of course, the storage, which can be the battery storage, and not only the lithium ion, but the various other chemistries where a lot of work is happening, and the IRA is supporting them in many of the technology space. The other storage in the Indian context is the pump storage, where we have large number of water reservoirs, we have large number of hydropower plants. How do we create the pump storage over there? We ourselves are working on nearly 2.8 gigawatt of pump storage solutions in our existing reservoirs, in our existing hydropower plants. And I think that's a very long-term solution which can be quite affordable and quite reliable. So I think that's one part. The second part is the aspect of resilience. And we did hear that in power supply, you need to have resilience. You have to have N-1. You cannot say that today is not a sunny day or a windy day and take holiday and you all can have a candlelight dinner. There is no power supply. So we need to bring resilience, and that resilience can only happen if we have a backup. And I think there was a discussion earlier in the day about nuclear power, and I think that is going to happen. It's a reality which will happen. How much of it will be between US, India? How much of it will be France, India? How much of it will be India, India? Whereby there are some technologies which have been used over there, but it will happen in a big way, and I've been associated with it, and I can tell you that you will see some big announcements in next 6 to 12 months on that. The third is the security of supply, and that's where we came into the picture, whereby both Mark and we have set of plans, and Jake has supported it by financing. And this is the beginning of possibly more that we need to do. We need to have security of supply, also of the raw materials, also of the various other support services that is required. And I think we need to work on that. We cannot be working in isolation where we just talk about, Mark mentioned about glass and inverters and various other aspects, the frames, everything. And how do we bring the security of supply for ensuring that we are not vulnerable to some other markets or suppliers who can at times arm twist us, and especially in critical areas which impacts the future of a country's growth. So I think these are the three big areas that we need to work on. And then we need to work on the financing and technology. So these are very, very important if we have to really become big, tangible, sustainable players in the long run. And I think the type of work that is happening and the various platforms which have been created between US and India, I think all of them are working towards that how do we develop solutions which are not one-off, but can have a very strong foundation for the future growth of the country.
Thank you, Dr. Sinha. Mark.
Yeah, so I guess I'll step back and just maybe give some excitement that I have as well as in terms of what I'm seeing in the US and as well as India. The world of electrification as it moves forward is going to have a huge dependency on solar, right? It needs something that can take a photon and make an electron to enable whatever your vision is beyond that, right? Whether it includes storage or whether it includes hydrogen or electrification for automotive reasons or for buildings or whatever it may be. It has to start with taking a photon and making an electron, at least for that component that will have a dependency on solar. And where I've been frustrated over the last 25 years that we've been a company. Now, we've been a pioneer, we've been a leader, we've been successful when others haven't, but there's been a huge void of cycles of innovation. The way this has played out over the last 25 years, there was, a strategic objective from China that was going to dominate and destroy any competitors in this industry. And largely is focused on a crystalline silicon technology that is not the semiconductor of the future. It's not going to be disruptive to get us to where we can go with this technology, right? Which should be 30+% efficiency at the module level. And because there's been, solar has been somewhat uninvestable, right? Those cycles of innovation haven't happened for over 2 decades. What we have an opportunity now is in the US and in India with the collaboration and having there's 2 semiconductors today that take photons into electrons. One is thin film, is what we do. The other is crystalline silicon, which is what Tata Power is focused on. And the ability to collaborate and then to integrate those 2 together in terms of taking 2 semiconductors, integrate them into each other, have them harvest each to their best abilities, the overall spectrum of the sun, combine them into one product, and then drive disruptive innovation and efficiency that creates this opportunity of electrification and then everything that can happen behind it is what excites me. Because we have not been in that situation. There have not been reliable counterparties that you could work with a level of integrity that we would want to have a complete crystalline silicon supply chain. And now that possibility is there in the US and as well as India. And that to me is what excites me. And I really do believe as we exit this decade, we will have a tandem technology in the market, multi-junction, thin film, which could be CadTel, our thin film, or next generation thin film such as perovskites, with a crystalline silicon bottom cell that'll be 30+% efficiency. And that can really change the world. So that's what I'm excited about. I think there's a real opportunity here that has not existed for 2 decades that can really move this industry forward. And the US and India are going to be technology leaders. When I see at the end of this decade, yes, today China controls 80% of the supply chain at least, in some parts 90, 95. We have an opportunity if we do this right as we exit this decade, it's going to be US and India leading the way.
Exciting days ahead. All right, it's time for us to open the floor. Please raise your hand and I'll cue you up. Please kindly mention your name, your affiliation, and keep your question brief. Yes.
Hi, again. I'm Jackson. I'm a college student from Bard, and I'm an intern for the Observer Research Foundation. So I'm curious, how effective do you think government financing is for sustainable development projects in India's neighbors in terms of spurring domestic capacity building? And do you see these markets as a major destination for growth for Indian companies in terms of their foreign, footprint?
Whoever wants to take the question.
I think there is, especially in the neighboring countries, there is an opportunity. World Bank and some of the other development banks have been there. Asian Development Bank has done financing. These are typically, again, solutions depending upon what are the natural resources. Like Nepal has a few hydro plants which are coming up and the transmission systems along with that. Bhutan has hydro plants which are coming up. So I think every country decides the type of solutions that they would like to have. Bangladesh has a lot of work happening on gas as well as on the transmission systems, and microgrids in Bangladesh are very popular. So each of these countries develop their own agenda, and those plans are getting implemented. We also have seen now that there is a regional grid which is connected between Bhutan, Nepal, and India. So there is a both side flow of power that takes place. In winter time, the flow of power takes place from India, and during summertime it comes from these hill stations, from these hill countries. So I think there is a great amount of synergy that can happen, and the way now one looks at all of them is, can we have a regional sort of arrangement between some of these countries?
May I just add?
Yes.
Just one addition to that, which is really sort of about the underlying theory of change of government finance, I guess, because you had specifically asked about the potential for government finance. I think it is that if we are successful, we're putting ourselves out of business ultimately, right? Because we don't want to be in a situation where we're competing with the private sector. We would like to be in a position where we're catalyzing the private sector, where we're crowding in financing that wouldn't otherwise be available. We've seen that to be the case in many of the investments that we've made in the region. I'm thinking also, I had seen Anurag in here somewhere, and but I think he's gone now. We also recently completed financing on a major infrastructure project in Sri Lanka, for which there would not have been private financing available, but that's the kind of investment that will bring a whole ecosystem of trade and commerce into the region that will catalyze and stimulate private sector investment. So your question is a good one, in addition to what is the regional opportunity, but what is the role of public finance? And I think our goal is to put ourselves out of business ultimately.
The lady in the second row.
Hi, Divya Gupta, and I own a global brand marketing firm. So I'm going to flip the switch a little bit and take you in the care factor. I'm a transplant from Orange County, California, so I've had the opportunity to work with Global Supply Chain, USC, and Clean Tech. And what I've seen constantly is a care factor that's missing on the bottom line end user. And so I want to take you to the creative side a little bit. How can we generate more care factor to reach those ambitious goals of carbon footprints and everything else? Because at the end of the day, we're all working for the bottom line end user, so all of us could collectively be a part of this. And having the opportunity to serve on many advisory councils for clean tech energy, I have access, I have resources, but not many do. So how do we create that access and resources for small to mid-sized businesses that we're able to generate more care factor? So,
who wants to give it a go?
I think what typically happens is you need to create platforms, and the local industry associations and various other platforms are being created where you bring the aspect of how do you bring these small and medium industries and share with them the practices and the technology that is available. Otherwise, today it is very difficult for many of them to reach out, and there are many new of these platforms which have been, in fact, there is a Young India platform, there is a women platform, as also for various types of industries. So I think there is definitely a way in which it can be done, but one can always improve upon them.
Just quickly, the only thing I'll add to it is that I actually think it's core to your culture and your company and your mission, right, in terms of what you're trying to accomplish. And you know, the one thing that I always say, if you ever want to know anything about First Solar, is spend time reading our sustainability report. And you'll know a lot about us as a company and our culture and our vision, mission, and what we do each and every day. And, you know, we've had since day one, and part of it was focused on our social license. And you know, have done value-added recycling since day one as a company. You know, we focus on our CO2 emission and footprint. We focus on our diversity, inclusion, and equity in our company. And we actually are trying to incorporate that into procurement processes as well. and we focus around our supply chain and diversity of our supply chain, and we have metrics which we work with them on, so they emulate kind of First Solar's brand and what we want them to do. And there's other companies that do that, like Microsoft and others, that do the same thing. So I think it starts with kind of your culture and your vision and mission as a company, but then you also need to try to also ingrain it into the commercial decision making, because unfortunately a lot of times decisions that are made today are just on financial returns. And we're gapping. We're not focusing on the totality of what we should be focused on to create something that truly can be enduring. You know, using the same analogy, we're very early in the journey. This thing's going to last a long time. We need to be leaders as an industry to evolve this the right way.
We're almost at time, so one last question, gentleman in the last row.
Emilio Bunge, President of Development Finance International. Thank you for a very insightful conversation. I wanted to switch a little bit to industrial decarbonization, which I noticed Dr. Sini at Tata Power, and to Jake, look at the issue of financing. If I'm an SME in Tamil Nadu, which I agree with Mark is a very dynamic state, it costs me 15 to 18% from a commercial bank, right, to do solar rooftops, for example. So what are the opportunities, or what are you seeing from your company? And then perhaps, Jake, what opportunities for DFC to bring blended finance, right, to bring those costs down? Thank you.
Well, it's a great question. It's one that we're sort of deeply investigating in a number of different areas. You know, DFC, I mentioned earlier that we're sort of a newly constituted organization that had been built off of a foundation of two predecessor agencies, the Overseas Private Investment Corporation and the Development Credit Authority. We have just completed a realignment of our entire organization with the sort of the goal of aligning around the strategic sectors that we believe will drive future development, but also equipping DFC to be more catalytic and to be innovative in certain sort of financing structures and modes that that our predecessors previously didn't engage in. One of those being blended finance. So, for example, we've opened an office that we call the Office of Catalytic Investments. Also on my team, we have a group that is called the Upstream Climate Pipeline Development Team. Both of these teams are focused on identifying early stage opportunities that really are pre-financing, which is to say that, you know, if you're going to a bank to look for financing, you've got your ducks in a row, you've got your project built out, you're ready to go, and you're seeking financing. We want to be a destination where we can also help bring together stakeholders. We can pull in other partners who can provide some of the philanthropic capital, some of the venture capital, some of the higher risk capital that we may not have, that we may have some of, but we can't solve all of these gaps. And that's really fundamentally a blended finance approach. I think in some ways we've been able to execute on this in certain transactions where we've been super early stage, where we've provided technical assistance financing to help bridge gaps in terms of paying for legal fees or for feasibility studies or technical studies, but we're really early days in terms of how we're thinking about what might be successful in this regard. I think one of the things that you hit on, which is sort of how to use blended finance to lower the cost of capital, it also raises questions about how certain sectors get financed and whether certain financing innovation has made it into certain markets. I think of, for example, the rooftop solar market in the United States, which 25 years ago was a very small market. Today is probably tens of billions of dollars a year. DFC took on a project to start thinking about how can we bring the types of models that you see people like Solar Mosaic in California, for example, doing to deploy long-term 20-year financing for homeowners in a place like Vietnam, Indonesia, or India. And fundamentally, that requires finding banking partners who can be financial intermediaries who have the appetite for long-term financing for homeowners or for small businesses that haven't previously played in this market. And it takes a long time to put that ecosystem together of the contractors, the channel partners, the lenders, the guarantors, and others. And so it's sort of the type of project that is ripe for investigation in our catalytic investment office or in our upstream office. It's different from what DFC and OPEC have historically done, but it's something that we're trying to learn about.
Well, folks, as tempting as it is to summarize these incredible insights, I will leave it to the expert, Rick. But I do want to end with a dash of foresight. So I'm going to ask you, what's your half-crazy prediction for US-India clean energy collaboration, especially in the wake of forthcoming elections in the US and the elections that have just happened in India? Jake, you can go first.
I'll go first. I'm just going to return to something I said earlier, which is that I think that in the conversation of diversifying and de-risking these supply chains, you so often hear the perspective that it can never be done, that we will never catch up with China, that the dominance is too great, that they're doubling down on the foundation that they've got. And my half-crazy prediction is that that's not true, and that we will diversify, and that the only partnership in the world that can make that possible is the US-Indian partnership.
My half-crazy expectation is that can we have IRA support Indian industry also? So then it's fungible, and you can set up a manufacturing plant, and you can actually 100% supply to the US market. So it's actually can meet both the expectation, but yes, something like that would be phenomenal.
Yeah, mine just, first of all, it's very similar to where Jake is, and it's that we're successful with what we're trying to accomplish here between the US and India, which is decoupling us from a dependency on an adversarial nation, and say it bluntly, and be a technology leader, more importantly. And I think that's how you win, and it's how you're successful long term, is you lead with technology. And if we can collaborate, work together, and become the technology leader that I think is in front of us with the two world-class semiconductor technologies that we'll have in the US and in India, the future's ours.
Well, gentlemen, thank you for your generous time and for your rich insights. Let's hear it for the panelists. Rick, over to you.
Thanks. I'll make it brief, so if everybody doesn't mind, remain seated for a second. Thanks again for a terrific closing panel. I think to be able to keep people around, of course, we all want to hear directly what the CEOs have to say. And for my long-term partner in crime and doing subnational climate work, Neil Majane, so thanks for chairing the panel. Those that have been coming to these events for a long time, like me, 30 years now, you always have to have the same starting comments on how similar we are and things that bring us together. The world's oldest and largest democracies, common law, English. But in some of the areas we talked about today, there are critical differences that sometimes tear us apart. We both want to see our trade deficits get reduced. We both want to see jobs being created for the United States to restore manufacturing and for India to build a vibrant manufacturing ecosystem for really kind of the first time. But if we look a little bit deeper, aided by heavy doses of capital, we can overcome these challenges and really make meaningful things happen. We called this a US-India climate event on renewable energy, but we all know it's not. As Jake kind of hinted, I mean, ultimately this partnership is going to drive good things that'll happen in the world for the next 75 years. So this was a US-India conversation to be sure, but with global implications. And thanks everybody for coming. Cheers.